Welcome to the conference. We're in a period of huge upheavals all across the world, with mass demonstrations all over the place, in all parts of the world. Of course, the latest one is in Russia yesterday, when there've been massive street demonstrations because when the opposition leader Alexei Navalny returned to Russia following his recovery from a poisoning which he believed had been done by the Russian elite, he was promptly arrested. Consequently, and his wife shortly after, consequently, there were massive demonstrations all over Russia, and people turned out despite COVID, despite the freezing cold, and despite the risk of imprisonment and police brutality. Things are running so high that there are massive demonstrations all over the world, and this seems to be the trend in history we're into now. So against that background, I'd like to introduce the first subject, which is a report by Jimmy about, we're going to be discussing WIN's interim coordinating committee. And we're going to be inviting comrades to give a short report from periods around the world about their own fields of work and events that are taking place. So can I ask Jimmy, how long would you like to speak for, Jimmy?
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Well, you did ask what I'd like.
How long are you going to speak for?
I'd say 15, 20 minutes maybe.
15, 20 minutes, okay, that's fine.
If I can get it down to 2, I will.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
First of all, by way of introduction to comrades that are not familiar with me, I'm Jimmy Kelly, and I've been a supporter of the WIN project since it developed. I'm living in Dublin, and I'm a trade unionist and a member of Social Democratic Party, the Irish Labour Party. I'm also a member of the British Labour Party because they allow it, so I take advantage of it. That's me. Now, what I wanted to explain is we are trying to develop a programme for workers under the name and banner of WIN. But this is not an abstract thing that came out of thin air or came out of the head of one single individual. The origins of WIN predeceased. I hate the English language when I get it mixed up. The origins go back long before the term WIN existed. Most of the comrades who are convening these meetings and meeting weekly, locally and internationally, have a long life of activity. Most have come through various mass organizations, but also through fringe organizations. And quite a lot of us have come through the experience of the CWI, and particularly through the militant tendency. Most of us all have, for different reasons and at different occasions and different events, parted company with those organizations, but have also understood the need that we have an opportunity to play a role in the struggle of the working class. We have an understanding of the need for that struggle, and we have a hope to put a contribution together and coordinate and collaborate while we do that. It's almost 20 years ago since, now I differ with Roger on this one because I claim that WIN started in Ireland, in that about 20 years ago in Donegal, the northeast of or northwest of the country, in a youth hostel, a number of us came together. Most of us were refugees from militant. But the thing about it was that we set out from the beginning to ensure that it wasn't an effort to rebuild militant or an effort to create a single organization. And I use a phrase which a neighbor of mine very often used when he was faced with a problem. We decided to sit down and see where we stood. And what we did was we assembled together a number of people. And I was just looking through the backgrounds of those people. There were people with militant experience in the Republic, in the north of Ireland, and in Britain. We also had the likes of John Ryman invited along, and a couple of other comrades from America. But we also had people from the Communist Party of Ireland, from Belfast. We had people from the Socialist Workers' Party. We had people from the IRA. We had people from the INLA. So we had people, now they weren't representative people, we were there as individuals, but it was an open door. And we did actually have one or two who were members of the militant, or had developed that stage, the Socialist Party. But we understood that we didn't have a monopoly of wisdom. We didn't have a monopoly of experience. And there were people with other opinions, other views, other experiences, and we wanted to share what we understood and try and work out where we could go, and also where we could play a role with other people. I personally found it an easy situation because being in the trade union, you also learn that you're not working with people of common mind and common experience. And very often I found myself as a trade union activist, whether as a shop steward or a site activist, or whether a national executive, you had to work for the common good of the membership with people who didn't share your background, didn't share your understanding, could even be hostile to your understanding and background, but you still had to work with them in the name and in the interest of the membership. That philosophy, which is my personal philosophy, was also the philosophy that generally developed and has been more or less the motto of WIN as it developed. Over the years, following the Donegal meeting, we had a series of other meetings in Britain, in London, the Conway Hall, and several pubs around London, in Youth Hostel, Liverpool, in Wortley Hall. But we also had meetings in Paris, and we had meetings in Dublin, including some memorable ones in a monastery. So we have been working together, pooling, sharing ideas. But the one thing that I have to say, and most of the comrades, if not all the comrades, will agree, we agreed at times to disagree. We didn't set out to develop a singular agenda, a singular solution, because we didn't want to establish what we had all come from, which was a centralized organization where the decisions were made, generally at the top, passed down for ratification or verification. And if you didn't like it, tough. And then the leadership made the decisions anyway. What we wanted to do was to create an organization, a platform for sharing where we come from, to try and work out where we were going, and to try and understand how we could contribute to the movement. Now, over the years of those exchanges, I'll give you one example of where we disagreed, and it's an issue that's still not resolved. It was on this question of Scotland. When the Scottish election developed, there's comrades on the screen who opposed the endorsement of the Scottish referendum. But there's other comrades here who worked for it and supported it. And the thing about it is that that's a fundamental issue for the people of Scotland. We didn't agree on that, but neither did we put a mandatory solution down. Neither did we put discipline down. We accepted that it's an issue that we haven't resolved agreement on, but it doesn't stop us working in so many other ways. And there's other issues in that occasionally come up that we will agree and disagree on. But the theme and the hope that we have is that by discussing, by experience, and by the world itself proving or disproving, that we will try to reach an understanding. Now, we don't reach this understanding, as I say, to create an alternative, a singular mass organization of the planet. That's too ambitious. We can't do that. It's not our task anyway. It's the task of the workers in the different regions, in the different areas of the planet. It's their job to do it. We can't do it for them. One of the things that I learned as a trade union activist was very often I see an issue involving one or two people. You take on the issue to represent them. You finish up taking on the responsibility for the issue. And you might resolve it or you might not. But even in the best circumstances where you resolve it, you've achieved very little. All you've done is just done some guy a favor. He has learned nothing. He has shared nothing. He has developed nothing. I've learned, I've understood, but I've left nothing behind. Now, the guy might go off happy or unhappy, but that's not the role that we want to play. What we want to do is participate in the experience of workers as they move. And the one thing that we understand is that the world has changed. Even in the short time that we've been discussing, we've been through a major economic slump, a major recession. We've been through incidences and situations where governments have risen and governments have fallen, where the left in government through the social democracy has been challenged, initially claiming to represent us, but in the economic battles that we had to fight as a class, nationally and internationally, they finished up either supporting governments or weakly opposing them. And the same applied from the political into the trade union movement, where with the rise of careerism and the rise of bureaucracy, the programs of austerity were forced on us, not just locally, but on a world scale. The world trade, the official leadership of the labour movement has not led, but there has been an establishment of massive bureaucracies, but to their credit, and not through their efforts, but through their credit, the trade union movements still exist to a large scale, even with diminished membership. There are enormous resources accumulated in the name of labour, and we have to face the challenge of being able to intervene into that. Now, one of the criticisms that has been raised recently by some of the newer comrades who have come towards, they have the expectation that we are attempting to build a centralized international organization. We are, but centralized in the sense of being a democratic organization, of an organization that's involved. Participation is a voluntary participation, right through to the most senior decision making, that there would be accountability and recall, and that there would not be an attempt made to try and create the monster of the organization that knows everything. We also understand the passage of time and the effect that it can have. There's some comrades here will be familiar with the little butterfly that starts off every year in Mexico and swarms up across the United States to Canada, and then turns and comes back again. But on the way, a generation of butterflies will leave Mexico, will reach a part of the United States where they will feed, breed, and die. And then the caterpillars that they create will again come out, move on, and it might even take 2 to 3 generations to get to Canada, where they will feed, breed, and start the progress back. If you look at it superficially, you could say a butterfly leaves Mexico, goes to Canada, comes back. But swarms of those butterflies travel that journey, but they're not the same butterflies. And we have to accept that we are, to some degree, like those butterflies. We're drawing on the experience of generations of socialists and generations of activists that are gone. And we've lost comrades along the way. Some of the comrades, at least 4 or 5 of those comrades who were at that Donegal meeting, are dead now. But their ideas their experience will still have been shared with us, and hopefully their objectives will be carried on with us as well. Bringing it back down to a little bit of detail, when the COVID virus struck, we had at that stage the early ambition of a meeting in Wortley Hall. And after a little bit of arguing, we decided that it was just too dangerous to do that. Now, we didn't expect that it was going to go on at this time, but there were some of us who argued that we were going to be off the road for a while. But it forced us into the 21st century because it forced us into technology. And the man who invented Zoom, I understand he's a Chinese man, but he made a great contribution to. I missed that.
Somebody that wasn't muted, Jim. It's okay. Carry on.
Okay, sorry. But we picked up the idea of Zoom, and we learned that Zoom could be something of benefit to us. And we started discussing, and I say we, it was a handful of comrades, just started discussing on a week-to-week basis issues that came up, which issues that were affecting us. And most of these issues that we started in the early stage were issues in the British Labour Party, and particularly in the various areas of the Labour Party, but also in terms of the work that we wanted to do, the publications that were planned and the publications that were actually produced.
You've had 15 minutes, Jimmy.
Okay, but what we did then was we developed on that further and created, now ambitiously or cynically or mischievously, we called it the Executive Committee. But the Executive Committee was an ad hoc committee, it's a non-elected committee, and it's a non-accountable committee. And we accepted that. We accepted from the very beginning. But we also accepted the necessity that it would have to be, if it was successful, it would have to be rectified. That if we're going to intend to build a democratic organization, that it should have a democratic leadership. And that'll be one of the tasks of later on in the conference, to discuss and decide on a replacement for the Executive Committee that's pulling this together. I'm going to leave it fairly well at that. I have pages and pages of script, but a lot of it's going to finish up just as repetition. And possibly I can come back in later if other points aren't picked up. But what I will conclude with is that the documents that we produced recently will indicate the gains that have been made in terms of the influence that Win is having. Within the British Labour Party, we have made gains at constituency level in terms of, not in terms of positions and control, but in terms of influence. Roger stood for the National Executive clearly and distinctly as a Win candidate. And to the shame of other people on the left, he was asked to withdraw. In fact, he wasn't asked, it was demanded that he would withdraw. But Roger is more resilient than that, and the organisation that was supporting him was more resilient than that. But Roger, coming from behind, coming from a very small organisational grouping within the Labour Party, did quite respectably well in a situation where there was a new voting system, where there was sectarianism by the other left groups, and yet Roger was one of the leading candidates and one of the last candidates to be eliminated. And it was tremendous achievement for Roger personally, but also for Win. There's been several publications produced, the On the Brink magazine and various other leaflets. And there has also been the extension and expansion of the influence of the ideas in terms of the relationships with people. And one of the ones that I personally have had a great interest in, and I'm going to mention it because it's an example that we don't get it right all the time. We might think that we know it all, but we don't. And that is an example of where we made contact with comrades in Belarus. And with the Belarus comrades, they were struggling against a dictatorship. They were struggling against the attempt by a new opposition to usurp itself onto the back of the workers in Belarus, and probably played a role of replacing the bureaucrat with a nationalist capitalist grouping. And as well as that, I'm speaking specifically here of the grouping, and I see Hannah's face on the platform there in front of me. The grouping of trade unionists, REP, the REP union, which represents the electrical workers. I personally made an identification with that grouping and offered to assist them in establishing international relationships with other trade union organizations in Ireland and globally. And despite the fact that we started off reasonably well, I made a very serious error internally in my own union, in that I attempted to take a shortcut of bypassing the structures. And while I was processing a claim through an executive that the union would support REP, would recognize REP, would make financial contribution to REP, and accept REP as an international organization, I made the mistake of taking on a similar campaign internationally, while at the same time asking the General Secretary of my own union to do the same thing. And all I succeeded in doing was leaving the right wing an opportunity to say, you are attempting to usurp the authority of the organization and the office of the General Secretary. And it has actually damaged the work that's been done. Now, the reason I'm saying that is, it's work that could have and should have been of benefit, but stupid mistake caused a serious consequence. Now, it's not irremediable. It can be fixed, it can be patched up, but it's going to require a patient approach. It's going to require a cautious approach, but it can be concluded. But it goes to show that I'm just as human, and the other members of WIN are just as human, that we don't get it right all the time. We can make mistakes along the way as well. But I'm going to finish on one tiny little remark, and again, it's personal. Yesterday, I was at a meeting of the Republic of Ireland branch of Labour International, the whole half dozen of us. But we had Labour International, I'll explain, is the international constituency of the British Labour Party, and has about 3,500 members spread around the globe, of which there's about 100 or something registered in Ireland, but only about a half dozen active. Yesterday, we had two guests from Northern Ireland Labour Party who were taking up the issue of attempting to get the right to stand Labour candidates in Northern Ireland. Now, there was a possibility, strangely, coming from the left in our small grouping to oppose this on nationalist grounds to keep the Northern Ireland situation as it is, in case it affected the right of Northern Ireland to be reunited with the South. In other words, they were taking the nationalist position, Labour must wait. Now, I personally intervened in that, in the sense that I got one of the speakers from Northern Ireland LLA on side and steered the meeting, and the meeting, at the end of the meeting, the southern section agreed to support the northern section and take the issue into Labour International. Now, the reason I'm explaining this is that it is possible in small ways to get things right, isolated, small singular issues, but we've now, in that situation, opened the door between two sections of the British Labour Party and two groupings, two left-wing groupings, to talk to each other. that little thing was a success, whereas the work with Belarus was a bit of a cock-up. But we will go through the period throughout all our experiences. We can anticipate that we will make mistakes and we will make gains. But the mistakes have to be acknowledged, admitted, and alternatives considered. And the successes that we make, no matter how small or how big, should be shared and learned from just as well. I'm going to leave on that and say hopefully come back in later if there's any need to do that.
Oh, thanks very much, Jimmy. I think that was a very worthwhile introduction to the background to today's session. Now I'd like to invite comrades to come in, talk about where you are in the movement, talk about what's going on. If you could try and use the electronic hand, because I'm looking at two screens of faces, I may not see you if you just put your hand up, or you could put a message in the chat and I'll spot that. So I have no hands up at the moment. Does anybody want to kick off? Leslie.
Thanks. I'll close the video down just because of my connection. Okay. Yes, I just want to say that WIN has made some great steps forward this year. We do have to consider the conditions of 50% of the population. So I just want to make some points about in the UK that the burden of the pandemic has fallen very much on women. Approximately 80% of health and care workers are women. Same for the public sector, including teachers. They're 80% of unpaid carers, and women are often amongst the lowest paid, even in trade union organised workplaces like hospitals. Women are often the majority of cleaners and caterers. Women are many of the key workers in retail and front-facing jobs. In addition, Black, Asian and minority ethnic women, on top of a likelihood of poverty and ill health, are also even less likely to be taken off the front line through institutional racism. And there was an incident at a large London railway station where two Black women were put out on the front by management. They didn't want to be. One of them was spat on by a member of the public. That worker went to report that to the management and they didn't take it seriously and sent her back out. That woman developed COVID and died. Even before the pandemic, Black women were 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And in the pandemic, we've seen, as well as women either having to go on the front line or lose their jobs, also have the burden of homeschooling. We've seen a massive rise in domestic abuse in lockdown, and obviously that's taken place in other countries as well. Here, refuges have been cut, housing resources were cut in austerity. The benefit system was changed to increase women's dependence on men. So the main benefit now, if you lose your job or you're on low pay, is universal credit, and that's paid to the man in most circumstances. So our programme for WIN also needs to reflect, and our discussions as well, need to reflect those kind of experiences and the demands that we put forward to reflect those experiences. Okay, thanks, Pam. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leslie, for that. That's great. There's no other hands up at the moment. Just while you're thinking, if we can try and keep your contributions to about 5 minutes, like Leslie did, and then that gives lots of people a chance to come in. Right, Davies Carza, would you like to come in next?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Great. I'm
Just
unfortunately.
to put in, can you just say where you're from when you start to speak, just in case?
I'm from Sweden, from the Workers' Party group in Sweden.
Thank you.
Way up in Umeå, where we were snowed in with over 1 meter of snow in the last 2 weeks. Happy times. We had no snow for the Christmas, but it's all now instead. Unfortunately, I have to disconnect from this meeting quite soon because we're preparing the municipal council meeting that's tomorrow here in Umeå. But I just wanted to say, I sort of, it was me and Janne who spoke at the last meeting. We had an idea that we sort of presented to Roger about how to sort of share the ideas between different comrades of the WIN all over the world. And it is by creating sort of an internet article archive. I mean, not like a proper like magazine where you need an editor and somebody who writes an editorial, you know, everything like this, like On the Brink has been, but more like an online article archive where you can publish. I mean, for instance, if there's some interesting issue. Now there's no interesting issues in the municipal council. It's just, you know, bathing in urine, as we call it here. But I mean, if there's a struggle, let's say among care workers here in Umeå, maybe we'll write an article and just pop it into the archive. And then if anyone wants to read it or share it somewhere, then it's a good way of doing it. And this is something that, I mean, the alt-right, as they're called in the US, they've been doing this for a long time. They've been very good at using the internet to spread their ideas and exchange ideas all over the world. And I mean, if the other side, so to speak, have got good ideas, we can steal them as well. And yeah, the big positive thing about having an article archive is that it doesn't need an editor. It just needs some people who know their way around and can just publish articles when they're translated. And I mean, I know that there's a lot of comrades who are making papers. I know that the French are sending out regularly emails about a new issue of their paper. We have a project where we're trying to create an online magazine and to get, there's this special state grant that we could get, which is a lot of money, which is good. And it's an easy way to get out and spread out ideas to new people. I mean, traveling around, especially in these days, is a bit difficult, but the internet is easier. And if we have a centralized archive with articles, then it's also possible to share them. I mean, on the WIN Facebook page, on our own Facebook pages and stuff like this. So I don't know if this is the proper time to put out this idea, but I wanted to share it with all of you, because I think it could be a way of sort of getting to know what's happening, because we're all involved in different struggles all over the world, and we need to find a way to share those with each other, and especially to share with other people who we want to get in contact with. All right. Thanks. Have a good meeting. I'm sorry I can't stay.
It's all right. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Jimmy. You've grown a bigger beard since last time I saw you up here in Umeå.
Thanks very much, Davis. Right, I think Carell was next.
Hi. If you don't mind, I'm going to stop the video because I think you'll get a better sound quality. So, okay. So I'm just going to do a short report from West Ham, which is in the East End of London, and let you know about some of the things that some of our comrades have been involved with. So over the last year, we've really seen those of us who are very active in the Labour Party still have seen a real increase in the ruthlessness of the right wing both locally and nationally. And we've been thinking long and hard about, you know, our future and the future of the British Labour Party itself as it moves further to the right, whether it will have, you know, big defeats coming up and making itself really irrelevant to the lives of ordinary people. I think it was Leslie who mentioned about the two women transport workers who got COVID and died. And some of you may have seen on social media and actually in the national press in this country, really very disturbing images of railway stations and packed tube trains from the East End of London, from a place called Canning Town. And, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people shoved in together. It's impossible for social distancing. I mean, they were like sardines. And it gives a lie to the fact that, you know, it's the public who need to take control, and they're the ones who are just spreading COVID. The real issue, and I think is being more and more exposed, is that these people are poor. These people have no option but to go to work and to risk their lives and suffer, because if they do not go to work, they will not get money, they will be homeless, they will not be able to feed their families. And that is the reality for a very large number of people in our area. We're the second poorest borough in the country, and 70% of our community is of Black or minority ethnic origin. We also have a situation where we have large numbers of people with no recourse to public funds. Now, what is the Labour Party doing for them? Well, it seems very little in terms of national politics, and how the leader of the Labour Party doesn't seem to be able to speak out for ordinary working people. So many of us are working in campaigns outside of the Labour Party and actually putting pressure on our local council, which has 60 councillors, and all of them are Labour, every single one. They're not fighting cuts, they're going to impose cuts from the government. They're acting as agents of the government, the Tory government. And food poverty is that, and housing, homelessness are the very, very big issues that are facing us. So we've had lots of, you know, food banks and organisations distributing food. But one of the things the local council wanted to cut, on which we had a recent victory over, was a scheme called Eat for Free. Now, Eat for Free is free hot meals for children in school in term time, for children of 7 to 11. There's only 3 councils in London that do that, and Newham, our borough, is one of them. And the council was planning to stop that for about 14 to 16,000 children, which was an absolute travesty. I mean, why it was even considered by a Labour council was the key question. So they've actually withdrawn that now. They had a lot of opposition. We had a little petition, it got about 750 signatories. But we also had a group of councillors who were supporting us, and they put a lot of pressure on the cabinet and the mayor. And as a result of that, they've withdrawn that. So that is a victory for us. We've also, I mean, I think there must be something like 10 really active campaigns in our area, a lot of them around trying to stop developers with things like the Silvertown link, the MSG sphere, etc. So there's a lot of turbulence here. And of course, on top of that, we've got the teachers' issues around teachers having to go into work, because schools haven't been closed, whatever the government have said, and the number of children has increased since January. So some of our schools have got 50% capacity. So we're having very big battles through our union. Now, so what I'm trying to give you a flavour of what we're facing. Many of us are talking about, you know, we think we're going to be suspended or expelled, and how we work outside of the structures of the Labour Party. And that's some of the things that we're doing already. So we're rooting ourselves, as we've done from the very beginning, in our local communities, in our local campaigns, working side by side alongside ordinary people that have just about had enough, really. And I think there's going to be huge upheavals ahead when we are able to go out and actually not just use the internet and the telephone and Zooms. I think when people can actually meet together, there's going to be a massive explosion, and you can feel the anger, you can sense it. And, you know, I think particularly in places like East London, which, I mean, they've always been political flashpoints. I mean, remember the Labour Party and the trade union movement, you know, had some of its origins here. I'm not going to take away from Liverpool, because I always think that's my second city. I know Liverpool also sees itself as the birthplace of the Labour Party and trade union movement, but we also claim it too. And I think, you know, those areas, we're very politicised here, and ordinary people in the shops, when you go into the shops and just talk to ordinary people, the sense of anger and the willingness to fight back is really visible here. So, you know, I'm just looking forward to the time when we can, well, we can be as ruthless as the right wing of the Labour Party have been.
Thanks very much for that, Carol. I don't see any hands up. Anybody want to come in? Ed. You need to unmute yourself.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jimmy, for standing in for me. When I let comrades know that I wasn't feeling too well, I was unsure if I would even be able to be at this meeting, and I'm very pleased that Jimmy stepped in. I just want to add a few words to what's been said already. I mean, I completely agree with what Pam said in opening this section of the conference about the significance of the huge movement that's taking place against Putin at the moment. And this is not just in Moscow. I mean, this is right from the Pacific coast of the former Soviet Union in places like Yakutsk, across 10 different time zones, right into European Russia. The hundreds of thousands of people, often in places where there were previous local disputes and hostility towards the Putin regime over local issues, you know, disputed election results and things like that. But it's all suddenly come to the boiling point, and it chimes in very much with what Pam just, what Carol just said, that there's going to be a massive explosion. I mean, these explosions are already taking place globally, and what we are trying to do is, I mean, WIN is a very small organization. It's an organization with a lot of experience that's come out of former Marxist groups, as Jimmy described, and we are trying to adapt to an entirely new situation. That there is a history of attempts to develop an organized international for the working class. When Marx and Engels set out to build the first international, they didn't achieve that by laying down the correct party line that globally all workers adhere to. They achieved their objective by creating a forum for discussion in which workers organizations from, in those days it was mostly Europe, but in today's language it would be all over the world, workers organizations could share ideas, pool experiences, learn from each other, teach, listen, play a role in educating the workers, play a role in listening to the workers. It was not, the First International was not an organization with one party line. It embraced anarchists such as Bakunin. It embraced ultra-left sectarians like Blanqui, who stood for sort of putches, you know, for minorities taking power. It embraced people with gradualist ideas, not for revolution, but gradual step-by-step approaches to reforming capitalism so that it gradually turned into some sort of socialism. And Marx and Engels worked with all these different strands, all these different currents, because all those different strands and opinions were representative of different moods, different feelings, different attitudes amongst different sections of the working class. Now, that's in huge contrast to the Third International, the International of Lenin, which stood implacably for a one-party line, that you stipulated very precise conditions that you must adhere to if you want to be a member of Lenin's International. And of course, there was a reason for that, because Lenin's International was created when the working class had taken power in Russia. This was just after 1917, when, of course, there was a thoroughly democratic revolution, nothing to do with the regime that subsequently grew up in Russia, of Stalinism, of repression and so on. But it was a thoroughly democratic revolution. And the careerist bureaucrats from the Second International, from all over the world, could see that their possible career would be advanced by them becoming members of the Third International, because this was obviously a huge global movement. So it was, of course, it was right at the time of the beginning of the Third International, when the working class had power over 1/6 of the Earth's land surface, that there should be a very different approach, a far more stringent approach, and a selective approach to who should join, because it was at that point in history, it was clear that the power of the workplace committees of working class activists in the factories, the term that was used for those committees was Soviets, that the Soviets were the place where power would be concentrated in the hands of a new regime based upon the organizations of the working class. And it was necessary to make a clear line of distinction between that approach to politics and the politics that was still based in the old idea of bourgeois democratic parliaments, which of course is a very limited, as we well know, it's a very limited and a sham form of democracy, where really the richer, the billionaires are able to tell governments what to do. So the Third International had very, very strict criteria for who should join it, who could join it. Now, in the aftermath of the degeneration of the Third International into a Stalinist international, the followers of Trotsky attempted to continue the tradition of the Third International and insisted upon a party line. And that was when there were organizations of the working class following the leaders of the Second International, and it was possible to win away those organizations and build a new international based around those organizations. These conditions no longer pertain globally. We are in a situation that is more like the situation that Marx and Engels encountered at the beginning of the First International. It's more like an entire regroupment, an entire rebuilding of the international movement from the grassroots upwards, and therefore we have to adapt our methods, and we have to have an approach where we're not laying down a party line. We're not even claiming to be the international, because it's ridiculous for a small group of 40 or 50 people to claim to be the leadership of the world workers' movement. We are here to listen, to participate, to learn, and to strive to build links. That's the key thing, to strive to build links between workers in action, because it's through the links and the discussions of the workers in action that a new international will grow and be developed. And that, I think, is the key difference. If there are any comrades here who are worried, are we trying to replicate what, I don't like using initials, because there are many comrades here who don't know what the CWI is, the Committee for a Workers' International. It's it was a small organization that was striving in the 80s and 90s to build a new international for the working class. But we're not operating in the same situation. We're building from fresh forces, and we are learning from those forces as much as we possibly can. So this has to include an analysis of the mistakes that have been made by the Marxist movement in the past. And I know one of the comrades, I saw an email from one of the comrades, has an analysis being made. If you get the opportunity to read through a huge thread of discussion that took place in the 90s, that's affectionately known as the Socialist Discussion List. Roger and I and Jimmy and many of the other comrades in this meeting were involved in it. We took apart bit by bit the mistakes that were made from the Marxist groups of the 80s and 90s, and we tried to reassemble those ideas in the language of what we were to expect in the coming revolution, so that we're no longer insisting on a party line. We're no longer posing ourselves as the organization, the only organization who knows the right answers. That's the old approach, you know, of the sectarian groups. We are listening, learning, bringing workers in activity, bringing workers in action together, and through that contributing to the development of a new program for revolution.
Thanks very much, Ed. I'll call Ammon in next, and then Felicity. There's nobody else, no other hands up at the moment, so if you can have a think if you want to come in and say something. So, Ammon, do you want to go next?
Yes, if I may. I just wonder if I can hear me. I hope you can.
Yes, fine, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for this third conference. I think what was said generally points out a number of different issues, which are all valid with regard to different experiences from different sections of different parts of, I think to a large extent, even European, if I may say, of experiences. So that's perfectly okay, that there is nothing wrong. And I think the win in terms of his approach to trying to bring people together and creating a network is perfectly admirable. And it's been done a very grand job so far in terms of bringing different areas together. I think I tend to actually agree with what Jimmy initially said, that we should accept to disagree in some parts, even on analysis of what happened or what just was mentioned with regard to the first or second or third international, of understanding even what is the experience of the fourth international. But I think that is something which is perfectly fit within the WIN idea of bringing the networks together. it is possible to actually say, no, there are different approaches. I personally think that the first international was the Marxist answer at the time. Second international was initiated by the same approach, though it degenerated. And then the third international was the same approach of what was understanding at the time. How we view it now is a slightly different, and also how we actually try to explain the reasons for their issues of, if you like, benefits or demise, then obviously that's issues that we got to discuss. But what I was trying to say was, in terms of the work of the WIN, I think the idea of bringing people together, bringing different experiences, is really the heart of WIN. The idea of the fact that people are coming from different parts doesn't necessarily make it an international. The idea that makes it international is the participation of activities across the world. And I think that's what WIN has been doing, and has been doing it perfectly well so far. There was one thing which I wanted to mention, because it is on here on the agenda. It does talk about the WIN manifesto and adoption of that. And I don't know whether I could actually give a couple of points on that, or would you rather that to be done at a separate stage?
Thanks very much, Iman, for that. Yeah. Felicity, you need to unmute yourself.
I too would like to make a comment on the manifesto thing a bit later. I think that the situation, I'm not sure how bad COVID is in all the countries that we've got represented here, but for me, certainly, virtually every day is like a horrible stomach drop. With it can't be this bad. It just can't be this bad. Yeah. And the meme that went out that said, first of all it was numbers and then it was names, and now we know these names, is there about how dreadful and ongoing dreadful the situation for COVID is. And yes, in time that will have an impact on politics in the country, and in all the countries it's been involved in many, many different ways. But I don't think we should I think we should genuflect to the pandemic in everything we say at the moment. But the other thing I'd say is that the other part that makes you have almost the same horrible feeling is hearing what next the Labour Party leadership have done, and the next. Some of you will have seen, I'll put the link in if you haven't, heard the new General Secretary of Unison, one of the biggest unions in the country, with her appalling interview at Women's Hour, where she basically said, we will not strike. I know our members will not strike. Absolutely scandalous betrayal of unions, of people in her union, including many who were on the front line in this pandemic, attempting to organise, and she betrays them before they even had a chance to do it. But the left has been through a terrible defeat with the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn, a further kick in the teeth with Jeremy Corbyn being kicked out of the Labour Party. But I do think that the last couple of weeks have seen a change in mood. Corbyn's Peace and Justice project saw 30-odd thousand people sign up for it, and probably 500,000 people see the broadcast of the discussion at the time. And the contribution of so there was a very good contribution from Varoufakis, and I'm sorry, the name's gone, of the other very old American who made a brilliant contribution at it. So, and I think it's slightly changed the mood. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to make Labour councillors do as you want them to do. And I mean, probably we've seen austerity at local authority level. It's absolutely destroyed key services. And now worse cuts still are being put through. And in Liverpool, even the best of the left amongst the councillors are saying, well, we've got to make cuts. You know, there's a long way to go to build up, you know, a real strong left position within Labour, although the different groups are, you know, are sort of building up a bit, and that's a healthy thing. But I work in Left Unity, which is not in Labour, and we work with people who are trying to oppose what the government's doing in a friendly and comradely way with Labour Party members where they agree with us and where we can, but also we work as part of the European Left and the European Left Party, which gives us, you know, detailed links into the struggle that's going on in the rest of Europe. And that's quite complicated. I had to write this week a description of what was going on in Britain for the other member parties of the European Left. And it's really hard to do that without appearing to be totally and utterly depressed by what's going on in Britain. But nonetheless, it's those links are important. And I think that they're there. But the core thing, and I think, you know, I appreciate what the last comrade said about how important the networking is and how important getting in touch with people is. But key importance is having an internationalist approach, is seeing this as a global problem, and that we've got to tackle these issues on a global basis. I mean, Leslie's mentioned a lot of the issues about the role that women are playing in this nationally and internationally. But I'd like to be able to come back at some point in the discussion on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Felicity. Just to return to Aman, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off before. I've just had a note saying you wanted to comment on the WIN manifesto. That is actually the next section we're discussing, but maybe there's one or two things you want to say. I apologise about that. I'm sorry, because I'm only looking at you on a small screen. I thought you'd finished. Sorry.
No, you were okay. I just said in terms of agenda, when you would actually bring it in. That was all. I just asked if you are going to do it later. That's perfectly fine. I'll wait.
Sounds not very good. Do you want to have another go? He sounds...
Sorry, I just said that in terms of the agenda, because I saw the WIN on there, now that you say that it comes later, then I said I will wait and talk then. But you were perfectly fine. No, you didn't cut me off. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay, we'll bring you back in later.
Thank you.
Right, there's no other hands up. John Ryman, you've just put a message. Do you want to come in now and say whatever it was? I don't see why not. Yeah.
It's not out of, I know this is supposed to be a discussion about WIN, but I wanted to make a couple of points about the United States in general. Is it kind of out of place in this meeting?
Well, I don't know that it is, because we're all talking about stuff that's going on in our own country. I don't know if anybody's any other view on it, but that's my view. Okay.
Well, you're chairing it, so
well, I can keep it to about 5 minutes.
So it goes like you want. So in the United States, as we know, ever since the Civil War, the US capitalist class has ruled by alternating between its two main capitalist parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And there are some secondary differences between the two parties, but in the end, they're both capitalist parties, all of whose wings of both of them are dedicated to maintaining capitalist rule, either by cramming concessions and attacks down the throats of the working class and more oppressed sectors of society, or at times by granting concessions. And now that whole method of rule is up for grabs, is starting to unravel. And I was thinking, you know, in American type football, when the offense has the ball, the most dangerous point for it is when the quarterback hands the ball off to somebody who's running. Because at that point, when you're passing the ball from one to the other, that's when there's most likely to be a fumble and they drop the ball completely. And it's a situation, something similar to that here in the United States. including the fact that one of the two parties involved is on the brink of a psychotic breakdown, and I'm referring to the Republican Party, and basically it's starting to devolve into, I think, what could accurately be called three different wings. The first wing is the old line conservatives, and they are being pretty much shunted to one side. The other wing, I think it's correct to call them a wing that's tending towards Bonapartism. That is to say, towards attacks on the working class, but also more increasingly towards repression, outright repression, in a way that U.S. capitalist democracy has not really instituted before, except in the South during the Jim Crow era. The third wing, and I never thought I would say this about a major wing of either of the two parties, but I think it is true. The third wing is tending towards outright fascism. And it's the type of fascism, what you could call left fascism, with something like Strasser in Germany and under the Nazis and so on. Economic concessions to the working class, but outright whipping up racism, repression, appeals to nationalism, appeals to establishing a religious state, which is to say a Christian state, and so on. And so what's happening is that this whole old way of rule is starting to dissolve. It's starting to disintegrate. And I think that, we've always said that the most important task, or at least I've always said this, that the most important task for the working class in this country at this time, well, for many, many years, decades, has been political independence through the establishment of its own political party, which won't happen in just one fell swoop, just jumping from having nothing to having a mass organized party, but has to start. And I think that it's in this situation of crisis. Now you see Trump is actually talking about splitting from the Republicans and forming his own party, which they're calling it either the Patriot Party or the MAGA, Make America Great Again Party. I think it should be called Pay All Homage to Trump and Give Him a Lot of Money Party. But in any case, whether he splits or not, that party, which is essential for the method of capitalist rule, is now in crisis. And what's going to come out of it, nobody knows. And those who think that they know for sure are the most confused of all. But in any case, it does leave an opening for entire new developments in U.S. politics. And I think that we have to look at the situation here from that in that regard.
Thanks very much, John. There's no other hands up at the moment. Any volunteers? Go on, Tia.
Hi, everyone. I'm just giving a report from Louisville, Kentucky. I wanted to share a picture, but I don't know if I could share my screen, but I'll try to send it later. So I'm just really touching base on the struggle that we're having. From last week to this week, what I've heard is we've had security down there, and the security has been infiltrated by white militia, and they're called the United Pharaohs of somebody, I can't remember. And they're actually the Boogaloo Boys have infiltrated, and their manifesto is that they just want to start any type of civil war regardless of whose side it's on. They're really anti-government. So they have, since we have not been so active, like on the ground, because it's gotten so cold and more people are doing more strategizing and training and stuff since it's cold. So since all of that's been happening, they have really been amped up on infiltrating. And now I'm hearing that the whole entire group is white militia, ran by white militias now, and they have said they want to storm the next Black leadership meeting that we have in the city. And so this just even goes to what I had introduced, like the resolution that I introduced last week, the support around the Cop Watch that the Kentucky Alliance is doing. And in the Cop Watch, I had described, if you haven't seen it, there's several ways that we need to protect ourselves. And first, we need to understand how community policing works. Far too long, we have relied on white supremacy to police us and to protect us, and that's not what they do to Black communities. And so we need to understand, if we're going to defund the police, I don't know if everybody's heard of that term, but if we're going to defund the police, we have to have in place our own type of policing. And so we want to train people. We need body cameras. We need protective gear. We need intel. We're going to try to do it as an app. So the way that it works is we're going to have like an offense and a defense. The defense will be a team, a street team that will go out. They will follow the dispatch calls. They will go to the areas. They will go to their designated areas, our district, like in the West End. And they will just police the police. They will, show on the camera everything that they're doing. We also have like probably about 300 cold cases in our city. Just FYI, we have like 5 police shootings a year, like police killings. I'm sorry. We have more police shootings, but 5, we have an average in Louisville, Kentucky of 5 people being killed by the police for the last 5 years. I've done my research, but it's probably been more than that. But for an average of 5 years, 5 people every year. And so we had 170 murders last year. About 80% of those are unsolved. And this goes into the trauma that I'll speak on in a minute. But so we want to develop some intel around all of the divisions in the police department. We have a new police chief. She is from Atlanta, and she quit when the police killed somebody in Atlanta this summer that was sleeping in Wendy's. I don't know if y'all heard about that, but so there's just a lot of stuff going on. And I appreciate the support from Carol and Felicity and Dave and Roger. And I know I'm probably missing a whole bunch of others that I can't see on my screen right now, but I appreciate that each and every one of you have reached out to me and you have showed me support. But the offense is that we have to do this racial trauma healing, because this is really traumatic to so many people. My kids have went to 8 funerals of young people their age since the summer, and we have buried 2 activists since October that were blatantly, like, they were fearless leaders that were vocal in talking about our police force, and then within weeks they were killed. Exactly the same way, coming out of their house, getting into their car, in their street in front of their house. So we want to do more intel research on those shootings and killings, as well as just some of the unsolved ones that we know are perpetuated by police, but they were just not caught. So yeah, I think I touched everything. I don't know. I just always speak from the heart. I don't never have anything written down. If anybody has any questions, I'm really free right now to answer anything.
Thanks very much, Tia. Yes, excellent stuff. Anybody else? Oh, Silvana, do you want to go next?
Good afternoon and good evening.
Can you tell us where you're from, Silvana?
Sorry?
Where are you from?
Oh, I live in Oxford, but I'm from Brazil. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about COVID. How is the situation in Brazil? Since the beginning of the pandemic, Bolsonaro, the President Bolsonaro, he never really cared about the pandemic. He didn't believe that this was important issue. So he wants everybody to go back to work, and he kind of ignored people getting sick. And then now we are 220,000 people dead. So we have a lot of death because of this COVID. So last week, in Manaus is Amazon's people there. They went to the hospital. When they got there, there was not even oxygen. So many of the people that were like in the hospital, they died because they didn't even have the oxygen. So and then the president saying like it was the governor problems and he didn't want to deal with it. So Venezuela, that is our border, Maduro sent some oxygen to the people to save lives. But the media, the traditional media didn't talk about this. Not even the Bolsonaro, he didn't say thank you to Maduro. I mean, it was just through the governors. But we have since the beginning, because Bolsonaro didn't care about the pandemic, the governors, they got together and they created these committees. So they kind of set up ideas how to tell the Brazilian people to wear masks, to wash their hands, to take some precautions, be apart from each other. But this didn't work because the president himself, he didn't do it. He would go to the people and talk to them with no mask on and this and that. And his ministers did the same. So he caught COVID and he managed to save himself. We don't know how, but he did. And then it even got worse because now he had the COVID, nothing happened to him. So people start saying, oh, this is nothing. So now a lot of people are going to the beach on Christmas Day. They didn't care, or New Year's. So now more people are dying every day. And this weekend, after the disaster that happened in Amazon, people went to the streets on their cars, going around town and screaming and beeping their horn to say that they are not satisfied with Bolsonaro. They want him out. So I think the Brazilian people woke up. So I hope they can overthrow this fascist from his power and take all his friends with him, because they are liars. They steal from the people. They are selling the petroleum to the big companies. So we don't want him in the power anymore. I think the Brazilian people woke up, some of them. Let's see what's going to happen, because he's a bad person. He might use the army to hurt people. Also, that he has militias in his side. So I don't know how bad it's going to become in the next few months. Thank you.
Thanks, Silvana. I don't see any other hands up. Roger's indicated he'd like to come in at some point. Is there anybody else that would like to come in first? Any offers? Otherwise, I'll invite Roger to speak now. Yeah, right, I think you're on, Roger.
Okay, I wasn't expecting to come in this early in the discussion, but right. I wanted to make a few points about why I think this discussion about the development of WIN is of vital importance. At our previous sessions, we drawn attention to the worldwide uprising that is taking place. And every day we're seeing new evidence. Just yesterday, of course, the magnificent display of protest and defiance throughout Russia. In the last couple of days alone, new evidence of the youth revolt in Uganda, Nigeria, and Thailand. So if taking all of these and all the other dozens of examples I quoted in my lead off in the first session, I mean, there's an inexhaustible pool from which to find potential comrades, allies, and recruits. And as far as WIN is concerned, it's paradoxical that it's precisely in the period of lockdown, when logically we're all supposed to be retreating into our shells, that not only has the revolution been surging ahead worldwide, but WIN has experienced an explosive new growth of contact and influence. In addition to the nuclei of co-thinkers that we already had in Britain, Ireland, France, Sweden, Denmark, the USA, South Africa, Pakistan, and Iran, we've gained or resumed contact, sometimes new contacts, and sometimes after decades, from the past, with comrades in Germany, Cyprus, Belarus, Brazil, Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, India, the Philippines, the Netherlands. So I think we touched the nerve of a few of these new uprisings also in Louisville, of course, and in Belarus. So it's a very exciting period for us. But I wanted to make, if you like, a word of caution. We must not get carried away. We're not an international, we're not even its embryo. We're still a tiny handful, a drop in the ocean of the vast multi-millions proletariat worldwide, which for the first time, let's remind ourselves, for the first time in history constitutes a majority of humankind. We've had probably 50 or 60 comrades attending our conference, certainly not even 100 in total. We don't have the youth who make up the overwhelming majority of the revolutionary mass on the streets. And yet, we caught the faint breath of the future international in these gripping discussions at the sessions of our conference. So the question looms large before us all. How do we transcend the huge historic gap between what small, modest gains have been achieved and what colossal tasks lie ahead? What work is urgently needed? What questions demand urgent answers and are crying out aloud to be resolved in the crucial period ahead? We need energy, confidence, audacity, but we also need, above all, a sense of proportion. One of Ted Grant's sayings was, "You can't shout louder than your voice." A small group can't hijack the movement of the masses. That's where strategy and tactics come in, the distinction between propaganda and agitation. And I found a few good quotes from Lenin and from Trotsky on this, which I would like to bring out. I don't want to reel out a long list of quotations, but these are particularly relevant. Lenin, first of all, who also used to quote from previous masters, but Lenin quoted Plekhanov. A propagandist presents many ideas to one or a few persons. An agitator presents only one or a few ideas, but he presents them to the mass of people. And in this connection, Trotsky used a brilliant metaphor. He said, the revolutionary tendency is the cog. The cog engages the wheel. The goal is not to jump ahead and arouse the mass of the working class and the youth with one or two snappy agitational slogans, but first to understand and develop our own theoretical understanding, then develop the cadres, explain and amplify the understanding of the vanguard with revolutionary propaganda. And that's, I think, very, very relevant to the situation we're in now. To quote again, in a later passage, he wrote, "If you represent this conducting apparatus as a system of cogwheels using the same metaphor once again, a comparison to which Lenin had recourse at another period on another theme, you may say that the impatient attempt to connect the party wheel directly with the gigantic wheel of the masses, omitting the medium-sized wheel of the Soviets, would have given rise to the danger of breaking the teeth of the party wheel and nevertheless not setting sufficiently large masses in motion. Without a guiding organization, the energy of the masses would dissipate like steam in a piston box. But nevertheless, what moves things is not the piston or the box, but the steam. So if we look at the world today, there's no shortage of steam today. What is needed is to create the mechanism by which it can move the world. The world revolution has started. It started really in, I suppose, if you want to put a date, in 2011, with the Arab Spring, the Occupy movement, the Greek uprising, spreading to Spain and across Europe. It won't come to completion quickly. It's a long, drawn-out process. There'll be advances, setbacks, brilliant upsurges, periods of defeat and reaction. In the process, a new generation will learn and absorb the lessons gradually in the course of those experiences. Sorry, can you all hear me?
Can you mute, please, if you're not actually speaking?
So the worst mistake is impatience. Impatience, both personally, it's always a fault, of course, but far more important, political impatience is something that we have to guard against. In April 1917, Lenin returned to Petrograd seething with revolution. The revolution was in full swing, as it had already overthrown a centuries-old institution, the monarchy, the Tsardom. There were at that time thousands, if not already tens of thousands, of members of the Bolshevik Party. And yet, Lenin, when he delivered his April theses, raising the slogan, "All power to the Soviets," in what you could not imagine a more urgent and desperate situation. But how did Lenin advise the Bolsheviks to conduct themselves? The slogan he went back to again and again and again was when he called for patient, this is a direct quote, patient, systematic and persistent explanation so that the people may overcome their mistakes by experience. That was Lenin's advice, as I say, when the Bolsheviks numbered thousands and soon to become hundreds of thousands in the midst of a full-blown revolution. How much more so for a handful of Marxists scattered throughout the world today? It would be disastrous to try to strain and snap our resources with a jump straight into mass agitation. I said towards the end of my lead-off in the first session of this conference, what would Marx do in the situation today? And I drew the analogy with Marx in the period running up to the 1848 revolutions. One, active participation in the labor movement. And we've given many examples, comrades have given examples from around the world of the energy that they're devoting into that activity. Two, building links worldwide. And I think we demonstrated at this conference with the 20 or so countries represented that we are beginning to build links, although we're still only at the beginning of a mountainous task. And then three, though, above all, political education in our documents, our website, our social media presence, our journal, our Zoom meetings, our most successful work to date. So we will reach the route to reach the mass of workers is by educating the key leaders. We can't sort of swallow up tens or hundreds of thousands of people, even though they're engaged in mass activity and upsurge and general strikes and revolutions. We can't reach them directly. We can reach them through the cadres, through the political leaders. We have to do as Lenin did in 1917, but all the more so. The role of our tiny forces is to offer patient, systematic, and persistent explanation, and above all, to educate those comrades who will become the leaders of the revolution when it really blossoms forth. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. Right. Jimmy, are you going to sum up for a few minutes on this, wherever you are? I don't see any hands up at the moment. Any more? Any more for any more? Right, okay. All right, if there's no further contributions coming forth, Jimmy, do you want to sum up briefly, or?
I think, Pam, it's fairly well been summed up in the sense that listening to the discussions, there is a sense of agreement in terms of where we stand in the numbers of people that support us, the number of people that are active in trying to spread the ideas, and the scale of the work yet to be done, that we're not running away with ambition, that we're not running away with delusion. And I think that that's a good place to start. We're still building in the ones and twos, and I think that's what we have to accept from now on. But the one thing that we also have to keep in our mind is that although it is expected to be a paced development and a paced role, the events that are taking place and will take place in the world are going to surprise us, good and bad. For example, we talk about the potential of Russia disintegrating at some stage and the effect that that would have. But one thing I would ask people to consider is that we might be anticipating the disintegration of Russia, but the capitalists of the world would also be anticipating the disintegration of Russia and laying their plans. Some of them would be military plans, such as the plans for NATO, but there would also be economic plans for the more direct exploitation of the Russian people and the Russian resources. And not just the West, but China itself has ambitions. Last week's meeting, somebody made a reference to the Belt and Road project. One of the things that I did was I had a look at how that's progressing, and I tipped into Uzbekistan. Now, I don't know much about Uzbekistan. I've heard of Tashkent and I've heard of Samarkand, and they're historic names from the past, but I don't know much about them. But there has been massive infrastructural investment in Uzbekistan. There's huge railway projects have gone on. There's been redevelopments of the cities. In Kazakhstan, you have the same. You've had even greater economic development, economic investment. Now, these are going to create new resources available to the world market, resources of minerals, resources of people, trained people. China has already got the toe in. And the questions that we will have to consider is what would the effect be with a restoration or a development of a resurgence of capitalism based on the possibility of China and Eastern Europe combining resources, combining skills, combining infrastructure, how that would affect not just the world scale, but how it would affect the revolutionary ideas, the acceptance of revolutionary ideas, and capitalism buying more time for its own existence. So there's discussions out there, there's debates out there, there's challenges out there, there's issues and questions for us. And the best way to try and get a handle on what's going on is to continue the work that we are doing in the manner that we are doing, and try to look at what's happening in more detail, and in trying to work out solutions that we can offer to have realism, but also with the open mind that other people will be coming forward with their own experience, their own understanding, their own ideas. I think the two words that I would leave behind are panic and patience. We have to have patience and we have to avoid panic. But the patience is the one that will give us the results, and not just us, but if we do it right, the method of working patiently will, and if it's passed over into the international movement, will be of benefit to workers internationally. That's all I really want to say. Obviously, there are other things to come up later on. The question of the structure of the political committee and the organizational tasks, but I think they can be better dealt with individually.
Thanks very much for summing the debate up, Jimmy. I tend to call that the end of this particular topic and take a break for a few minutes. After that, we'll be moving on to the next topic, which is the WIN Manifesto. Hannah, do you want to come in now?
I hope everyone can hear me because my laptop's been playing up.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to just two things. The first, I would definitely agree with Roger on that workers' education is extremely important, and slowly educating people, especially people who were under long years of capitalist propaganda. As it happens, that's the case where that propaganda started in the last few years of the Soviet Union. And right now, workers, after 26 years of dictatorship, they don't really understand, most of them, they don't really understand their rights, and they don't understand how powerful they are. And it's only starting last year that people started getting out, people started to understand. But what has been happening is that the revolutionary attempt has been colonized at the moment. People who are associated with very capitalists who with those people who basically tried pushing the mentality towards towards basically pure capitalism. And what we're trying to do now is we are actually trying to develop a campaign to educate workers, starting from trade unions onwards. So David helping us a lot, David Hempson, to develop the workers program, and we're very grateful. So we are trying to do with REP to develop a very comprehensive program to start educating people at factories. So that will be slow, yes, because we need to be cautious. Otherwise, people will be simply arrested. But at first, we are planning on educating a small group who would then become leaders in on the periphery, and then they will go to their own factories and they will create groups and educate the world about workers' power, about what should be done and how we can actually achieve the society for the workers. So, but so I do agree that that's going to be a slow movement, but we do hope to start at some point. For which we're trying to campaign to raise some funds, because otherwise, to be printing and so on. So that's one activity that we're doing now. And another one, we're obviously trying to help comrades who have been arrested. And the two latest cases, which are the worst of all for us at the moment, case of the Gol case in South Belarus, where they detained comrade Leonid Sudolenko, who is basically the union's main. volunteered his time as a lawyer, and he helped people to pay the fines. He did and now they're trying to make him into some financial brain behind the unlawful protests. So they're trying to make a false case against him, and we obviously, trying to help. And I would like to raise the awareness on rights to and appeal to everyone to try and have action against that. And the most appalling case that we have now is in Brest. This is the case of the union activist Daria, who she was at the protest and she tried to free some of the comrades, so she grabbed a policeman by the sleeve. And for that, she got basically 2 years home arrest sentence. They still allow her to work, but they cut their hours. And she is a widow with young kids. So, I mean, she's a worker at a fish processing plant, despite her having a university degree, but you just can't get a job in the Peru, so she got what she got. And after her husband died, she just didn't have a choice. So she works at the factory, and the wage at the factory in Belarus is at best, on piece rate, at best $200 a month, maybe $250 if she works overtime. So we are trying to help as much as we can, and we're also hoping for solidarity here, because her lawyers' fees are enormous, and the union's trying to do what they can, but they can't do that much. So so that's another sad case that we have. Basically, we tried, and the union tried, talking to the so-called finance people, Weissel, who claims to be helping people to finance the lawyers and so on, and got declined because apparently it's not in their interest anymore to help the victims. So we are trying to do what we can with ourselves and trying to fight these injustices, trying to petition, but again, we are looking for solidarity there. So this is the situation in Belarus at the moment, and we're looking very closely at what's happening in Russia, but so far we don't have high hopes because it's just starting, and Russia has a much stronger security apparatus, so we'll see how they react on what's happening. So we are taking, in terms of expanding and educating workers, we're taking a slow approach. And right now, as I said, another focus is on fighting these injustices.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Okay, so the next hand I've got up is David Hempson. David Hempson wants to give us a report from Zimbabwe.
Thank you, comrades, and apologies for my technical incompetence here. Thanks, Steph. Now, look, first of all, I just want to pay a tribute to, the work that Tia and the comrades are doing in Louisville. Tia is very modest, but can I say that lives are on the line in Louisville? But the comrades there are organizing in very, well, I wouldn't use quite the word sophisticated, but really very thoughtful ways, and trying to get the communities together to police the areas around them, because there are vans appearing in camouflage. There are men walking around that people have never seen before, and comrades are dying. They've lost 2 comrades in October, and there's fear for more. And the Proud Boys and others are there. So let's just keep them in mind. Now, I said I'd be speaking about Zimbabwe, and I just want to deal with an extraordinary development. you see here somebody called Comrade Nyamunga. He died about 4 years ago outside the army barracks at Cranbourne, and they called it a traffic accident. That's what happens to people in Zimbabwe when they become politically active. They tend to have traffic accidents. And there was no real inquest into his death. It was just written off as a traffic accident and so forth. But I just want to pay tribute to the type of people that we have and we're drawing in to the organization. By the way, his son has contacted me, and so now I know the whole story. Here he is developing the machinery for the largest hydroelectric development in Southern Africa, which supplies, Zimbabwe. He was the most outstanding work. He was president of the engineering union, and he joined in the work that we were doing, led it from one end of the country to the other, and we got in something like 45 factories into a campaign, to rid the union of a corrupt and incompetent leadership. And that was the time for a clampdown. Just 2 days after this picture was taken, you'll see Nyamunga on the right-hand side, you'll see Robbie Down on the left, you'll see other comrades there who we've not been able to reestablish contact with. But these comrades were arrested, tortured, and their kids were thrown out of the schools. Everything was done to smash their lives, their homes, and their future. Robbie Down is seen in the center, is no more with us. The last time I saw him, he was being pummeled. His face was as big as a football, and he was struggling to breathe. Look, he survived the immediate post-prison experience, but I couldn't find him when I went to Harare, and no one seemed to know him. He disappeared from the earth. So with that background, sorry, I'm looking for a quote here. No, I don't have it, sorry. Thermodynamics, okay. I was told that when we had the clampdown, that everything would return again. And I must say, I was skeptical. We had lost completely, we had lost the lives of comrades, and there was, it seemed impossible that we could actually have that. And one of the comrades went and, in a very optimistic, or maybe over-optimistic, said that nothing would be lost. And I had my doubts, and I said so. Now, if you look at the first law of thermodynamics, it says that energy is always conserved, cannot be created or destroyed. Energy is converted from one form to another. And yes, it did. Those comrades who managed to survive turned themselves into sportsmen. They started up sports shops because they couldn't get jobs. They developed everything they could around them, went back onto the land to be able to grow food, to be able to eat and sell. And now the comrades, unfortunately, the comrades are not with us today because there's another power cut in Zimbabwe. When the power cut is there, there's no Wi-Fi at all. The comrades have tried to participate in the past. But we now have a situation where the comrades, we brought one comrade over to Britain and spent 6 months with us. That comrade is now back alive in Zimbabwe and leading a venture there, developing a group of comrades, which is intervening in the schools, opening up debates, and setting up relationships with women in the streets, street vendors, and opposing the regime. So it's an extraordinary story in a way. We thought everything was lost, but now it's all coming back again. Now, just, I would like to say a few more things, but look, the big point that I think has come up in all our discussions is, just how do we work at this period? And it's very important that we develop our theoretical apparatus, our theoretical development of cadres, of comrades, turning them into cadres, developing, working very humbly with them, older comrades working with younger, people actually really developing and spending more time on the political reading, the political development. And the reason is that the working class, as we see the Gramsci quote, cannot become economically dominant class before its rise to power. The bourgeois controls the media, it controls the universities, it controls every aspect of science, actually, even though we want to work with science, it's controlled by the bourgeois. And so we find the working class actually has to have some apparatus on its side. And how is that developed? It's through the thinking apparatus, which is embodied in our organization. We have to develop ourselves, our comrades, and the theories in which we are working with, so that we develop those ideas and we transmit them throughout the working class. Now, I come to some further
David, can you start bringing your remarks to a close, because you've had 5 minutes. We might be able to come back to you in a minute.
Well, okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make one last point, really. It relates to the Facebook. You know, we've got Win Facebook. It's picked up enormously. You'll see that the reach that we've got above there is 1,341. We don't have terribly many page likes, but what's happening, the Win Facebook is coming back to life. It's showing all kinds of engagement. If you look at the post here, the one which has really got the most interest in the recent period is the discussion which Jabu had undertaken in Oxford, and we supported, and you can see that we got 1,300 people viewing that. That actually brought Win Facebook back to life, as well as the critique which I made of the fact that jobs have been reserved for men in Russia, and now there's a slight movement of reform, but not very much, and a kind of ironic article and so forth. And John has contributed, that is, John Reimer has contributed many other useful articles. So I do appeal to the comrades to develop our theory, to develop the work which we're doing. Please return and link up with the Win Facebook, because you will find some enormously interesting material there. I'll stop right there. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks very much, David. I can't see the screen properly
Yeah,
yet, there's no doubt. I know, I will in a minute, yeah. Right, there's no other hands up at the moment. I'm just returning to the question that was asked of John Ryman. If John can sum up fairly briefly, I'm just wondering if you want to try and reply to that question.
I mean, there were several questions that Thomas Berger raised, and they really go to, in some ways, the heart of the matter here. And it's really not possible to, I mean, they're very, very important questions, and it's really not possible to answer them in just a few minutes without, shall I say, being open to, well, what should I say, misinterpretation. So I think the best thing, hopefully at some point in the near future, when we'll have 1 or 2 meetings on US perspectives, and in the meantime, all those questions I have dealt with, I think, in some depth on my blog site, oaklandsocialist.com.
Thanks very much, John Ryman. Well, I mean, the information's out there if people want it. We can contact each other, can't we? So thank you for your response.
Pam and Roger, could I ask if Rob Dyer had a presentation, you know, short one, I think, on climate change? I know he prepared. I wondered if maybe we could conclude on that, you know?
Would everybody be in favour of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, just wave your hand if you're in favour. Yeah, I think we all are, really. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, fine. Good suggestion, David. Rob Dyer, do you want to go ahead? Maddie, you've got your hand up. Do you want to say something while Rob's getting set up?
Well, while Rob is getting settled, I thought I would pose a question to him. During the first months of the COVID epidemic, we saw fabulous pictures, animals and birds walking around urban areas. Yeah. We saw pictures of the sky being clearer and things like that. And then came the statistics, which, as far as I can understand, actually said that the negative development in in temperature rising and stuff like that has actually increased. This seems to me to be a contradiction. And if, Rob, you can address that issue so that simple people like myself can understand, I'd be very happy.
So climate catastrophe, perspectives and politics. Just briefly to answer the query about the downturn in global emissions, I think that has been pretty temporary as industry throughout the world slowed down quite dramatically. And I think the emissions have started to pick up again. And certainly the perspective is for it to carry on increasing, depending on a number of factors like economic growth, the actions of world governments, things like that. Okay, this is a graph showing average global temperatures. At the top, I don't know if you can see the cursor, that's the 1.5 degrees above what was seen as the normal level, which was sometime last century. Okay, is that all right? Average global temperature 1.5 degree target.
Yeah.
Okay. At the top of this graph, that is 1.5 degrees below the average global temperatures last century. And these lines going up are the average or means or trends of the world's average global temperature from 1970 to the current day. And you can see it's going up pretty steadily. You won't see the blip in 2020, but it'll probably come quite down a bit, but then go up. But the underlying conclusion is that at this stage, despite the kind of actions that governments are taking or claim they're taking, the global temperatures are carrying on rising. Okay. This graph just shows emissions by country, and this big orange block you probably won't be able to see. I don't know if you can see it well, but that's emissions from China. So they are by far the biggest emitters of all the different countries. This blue pie slice is the United States, then India, then Russia, and then so it goes on. And this gray one is all the small countries, the rest of the world. So certainly China has the future of the planet very much in its hands at the moment. And unless China brings its emissions right down, the catastrophe that we all fear is going to happen. These are, sorry. This blessed.
Rob, I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but whatever you try to do doesn't change the main slide one iota, so it doesn't get any larger. So when you do move to the next slide, it never improves.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, that's good to know because it'll go a lot quicker. Okay, these are greenhouse gas emissions by sector. The largest sector is electricity generation, which is about a quarter of all greenhouse gases. Then very close behind it is agriculture. A lot of this is from the raising of cattle, of beef, but also quite a lot from rice production. Then third one is industry, just over 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Then transport, and about 14%, then buildings and other. So although a lot is talked about with regard to electricity and green energy, there's a lot more that has to be done. Agriculture, industry, and of course transport. And the difficulty with transport is the large vehicles, but most emissions are from small vehicles, so there is progress on small vehicles. Okay, just a bit on the protest movements. I did mention this the last time we met. Many young people throughout the world have been protesting, but the leaders of these protests have no real political understanding of how government power is necessary to make the kind of changes that are necessary. They talk about beyond politics, citizens' assembly, and some are talking for regrowth, for degrowth, for ending the assumption that economic growth is vital for human well-being.
Yeah.
Okay, then the question, can capitalism respond to climate change? And I think this is a very big question. Many socialists say that capitalism is inherently incapable. In the Perspectives document, it says only with the downfall of capitalist rule will the climate emergency be tackled with the utmost urgency, and that one can't disagree with that. But does this mean that without socialism, the planet will lose its ability to support human life? And my argument, this isn't an either-or situation, that capitalism does have the capacity for some kind of adaptation. More and more climate scientists are talking about the need for governments to take emergency powers. And I think this is where the whole concept of the declaration of a climate emergency comes from. The respected climatologist Bill McKibben, 4 years ago, he described the Paris Climate Accord as a real failure in politics, equivalent to Peace in Our Time from Chamberlain just before the Second World War. And he and other scientists talk about the need for a World War II kind of effort from the United States, but by implication other capitalist countries, to totally transform the economy towards taking down fossil fuels and replacing it with green power and green energy. These are some of the other interventions. A victory plan from an organization, a Climate Mobilization, also 4 years ago. And then from a scientist and an engineer, Cap and Adapt, which is a plan to put very definite and hard caps on the emission of fossil fuels and the burning of coal and oil. So these are the kind of measures that scientists are talking about. These are the more perceptive and honest scientists. And my view is that as the climate crisis gets worse, as more people understand how serious it is, governments will be pushed more and more to take some of the measures that would be required. So what should be the socialist response to to these calls for governments to basically put their economies on a war footing. We must obviously I support the closing down of fossil fuel companies and the taking over of big oil, coal and gas, and then guarantee the jobs of fossil fuel workers reskilling for work in the renewable energy sector. This point about jobs and reskilling is so obvious and vital, but the middle class climate activists that are leading the climate protests really don't see this as an essential part of their campaign. And we should support the establishment of new state institutions to plan and manufacture renewable energy infrastructure. So the idea is that these would be transitional type demands to support the actions of a capitalist government to redirect the economy towards a green economy, the green economy. What we also need to do is guard against authoritarian state actions, because we're looking at a situation where governments will need to take a lot of power into their hands with regard to the economy, and there are definite dangers about the closing down of democracy. We need to call for democratic participation in and oversight of any new institutions, and also that this must be an international effort, part of a coordinated international plan, with the wealthy countries having to share resources with the poor countries, most of which just cannot afford these kind of measures. So that's briefly my presentation, and what I think WIN and socialists need to do is to prepare themselves for increasing climate protests, and the same way that we are seeing political protests across the world. In the future, we're going to see climate protests that are just as dramatic as the ones we saw 2 years ago, and multiplied by 2, 3, 4, or 10. There are going to be huge climate protests, and we need to be aware of them, and we need to know how to respond to them and what positions we need to take, and to try and, as with people, protesters in countries that are protesting against authoritarianism, we need to try and win these climate protesters, particularly the young protesters, over to our ideas. Okay, thanks. That's the end of my brief presentation.
Thanks very much, Rod. That was Rob. That was very interesting, very useful. Thank you for jumping into the gap like that. I imagine there will be comrades wanting to ask questions and make comments. Well, I can't see everybody at the moment. If you could just close your display down, I'll be able to see everybody then.
Okay.
Right, Maddie, I can see your hands up. Do you want to kick off? You need to unmute yourself.
Right.
I'm trying to get my Zoom.
Sweden, I think,
okay, there we go.
In this particular case, come quite far, because Swedes are very, very concerned. So that any political party that wants to have any traction and make any impact has to have some kind of political, environmental aspect. And the result is that we have in our daily lives quite a number of things that are happening. I live in Stockholm. My flat is heated. It's always, even when it's below zero, it's 20, 22 degrees in my flat. It comes in heat is pumped from a central place where they use, to a large extent, burn recycled stuff that gets thrown away in normal cases. We have a very clear breakup of all our different kinds of waste products. And one of the, you mentioned, Rob, the difficulty with large vehicles like buses. Sweden has a number of buses that are traveling on biofuel. And I never forget, it amused me greatly, the ad for making sure that we separate our food waste from the rest of our junk. And that is that on one banana skin, a bus can travel for 75 meters. So there are, what I'm really wanting to say is that there are technologies available. And I think personally, I think it's very important, if we're trying to create a mass movement, that we also involve individuals, that people feel what I do makes a difference.
Thanks, Maddie. I suppose we'll all be reluctant to throw our banana skins in the bin now. We're thinking about that 75 meters. Go on, Felicity.
Yeah, I'm trying with people from not just Left Unity, but the radical sections of the Greens, and with people from the European left, to make sure that what happens in the in September, when there is the COP26 event in Scotland, that there is a good position, a system change position put effectively at the, whether it's held, you know, in a virtual world or whether it's held in real life in Scotland, that we actually do have that position put effectively. I'm not as pessimistic as Rob about the people who are putting the issues as being, you know, all sort of middle class. In this country, we had, you know, we had the anti-fracking, which has won. It's really important to remember that anti-fracking won. And working class women, some brilliant people, absolutely superb people, literally camped out on the sites and fought the police as though they're on a picket line. Time after time after time, nearly 2 years, they were in Preston New Road. And you know, I'm proud. You know, they presented me with one of their aprons. The fracking nanas gave me one of their aprons, and it's one of my prized possessions. No one's going to call them middle class women. They fought and they won. And when I was horrified that Cheryl spoke at a Left Unity meeting for us this week, and a Liverpool Left Unity meeting. And she was saying that the fight against fracking has not been won in the States. And I was under the impression it was a kind of, it had been won pretty close, pretty well everywhere. But I'll finish just by saying, look, if you personally want to be involved in what we're doing, trying to get together to get something working so that there's a socialist position, a socialist system change position, put in the stuff that's, you know, discussed, and it will be a huge level of discussion all across the world, what goes on in COP26. I mean, don't expect anything at all from our government. I mean, I think it is possible that some more stable, sane governments might do something to help it. I mean, our unspeakable bunch will do nothing other than try and rip it off and make some money out of it. But you know, the offer's there. If you want to be involved, please get in touch, and I'll make sure that you're kept in the loop for what's happening, and you know, with the people who are trying to do something for COP26.
Thanks very much, Felicity. Right, see if there's anybody who wants to say anything. I can't see any hands up again. Go on, Maddie.
I was part of an amazing celebration. I mean, on Friday, it wasn't, I mean, what was amazing about was what it had been achieved, and that I haven't seen anything in any of the mainstream media about it. But 86 countries in the members of the United Nations have signed a treaty to ban the bomb. And this treaty reached a critical level in the past few days or weeks, and it's now official UN policy. I mean, obviously there are lots of bombs and there are a lot of pressure. One needs to put a lot of pressure to make sure this is implemented. But it's a huge step. It goes back to the 50s, if not the 40s, and involves millions and millions of people, from famous organizations like Greenpeace to organizations in Sweden that prevented Sweden from becoming a nuclear power. And I mean, it's huge, and no one said anything. I know Felicity gave us, yes.
Okay, thanks, Maddie. Ed, I think you were next. Felicity, you had your hand up, but it's gone down again. But I'll bring Ed in and then you can, okay.
I don't mind if Felicity wants to go first.
No, I was just putting a thumbs up for what was being said.
Oh, right, sorry, okay. I misread the symbol.
Okay.
Go on, Ed.
I'd just like to add to and underline the point that's been made about the importance of this to be about system change, because I've been at a number of meetings where either through naivety or through middle-class prejudice, there have been people who've argued that, oh, well, it's just too bad for people working in traditional industries like, carbon fuel industries, if they all get made redundant. The planet is so important that this has to be done, even if it means trampling over their jobs. And of course, the problem with that, I mean, yes, in an abstract sense, it is so important that it does involve trampling over their jobs, but that's just an abstract position. In concrete political terms, the movement for climate emergency will never get the support of the majority of the population unless we show how the people working in traditional industries that produce carbon emissions, unless we show how they can be redeployed with proper apprenticeships, proper training, parallel levels of wages and so on, parallel terms and conditions, into a whole raft of new climate industries. I mean, there's a few examples. Take the reduction of car use, and the introduction of smart buses, of car sharing, of transport systems that do away with this ridiculous conception that 700 million cars need to be sold across the planet. It's entirely possible for the number of vehicles on the roads and the planet to be reduced probably by about 90%, if there was a rational use of the vehicles that there are. But that presupposes really that the car industry as we know it today, frantically pushing for more and more sales, will be at loggerheads with any government trying to introduce that. And that, I mean, and we know the power relationships between big car industry and government. So it's a whole issue of who runs the planet. That very issue. It's the same with I mean, you take in my area in Northumberland, in the north of England, there's a lot of talk about geothermal power. Now, geothermal power in this part of the country is absolutely free, and it's already, in a sense, publicly owned, because there are loads of disused mine shafts, and in those mine shafts, because they're nearer the core of the earth, there is a lot of hot water, right? And the Tories in this county council are talking about making that geothermal power available. And how are they going to do it? It's our mine shafts, because the nationalized industry built most of the mine shafts. Therefore it's our heat, it's our source of power, and they are going to get private companies to come in, pump down into those disused mines, and then sell our heat back to us. So, you know, it's absolutely clear that these issues, they're not just abstract issues, that they are class issues of, do we go ahead with this project for protecting the planet? Do we go ahead with it through a collective approach, which was actually the approach being put forward by Jeremy Corbyn, which is one reason why the establishment feared him so much. And it was another reason why even all the enemy parties who said that Jeremy Corbyn's policies were so extremist that he was never going to win elections, they all adopted a Green New Deal policy before the last election. I mean, of course, they took out of it the social ownership content, because they're Tory parties. But you know, these issues go right to the heart of what kind of method does humanity use to save itself from environmental destruction? Is it a collective method, or is it just a continuation of the greed of capitalism that won't really make very much progress in this direction?
Thanks very much for that, Ed. I think Rob wants to respond to that. Or I'm just wondering, actually, Jimmy, do you want to sort of ask a question that you want Rob to answer? Shall we take you first and then
I didn't want to ask a question.
He was waving at me. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to ask a question, Pam, but I want to take advantage, if you give me a couple of moments, just to explain what's happened in the energy system in Ireland, because it's a pattern that's probably been repeated across Europe, but it's still worth looking at. Over the last couple of years, first of all, the Irish Free State, when it was established after the Civil War, required an awful lot of investment of state assets and borrowing of state guarantees to create an energy sector. And they built an electrical system, and they took advantage of the fact that there were private companies supplying gas. The electrical system was pretty good. There was serious investment. It was totally, well, it was called a semi-state company, in that it had some private investment in it, but in reality, it was a state company. Under Euro legislation, a Commission for Energy Regulation was established, which put limits on the electricity generation. The Electricity Supply Board was told they had to sell off a third of their capacity to private sector. And gradually, they were squeezed. They had a retail sector, and it was private. In fact, it was closed up completely. And running alongside that, there was a couple of private gas companies, municipal gas companies, and they tended to collapse and were bailed out by the government, and a new gas board established. The traditions in both the electricity and the gas and in peat, we didn't have much coal industry here. It was a small private sector, but there was a large sector generated, particularly in the war period, to harvest and use peat. And these were good jobs, as jobs go. There were decent wages, there were unionized jobs. The training in those companies was first class in terms of apprenticeships. And there were again, in communities and regions of the country where they've made important contributions to the social life as well as the economic life. The policies of the last couple of years has seen, as I say, the electricity industry has been attacked. The gas board has been effectively strangled in that there is still a body called Bord Gas Éireann, or the Irish Gas Board, but the real work is administered by contractors. Currently, Balfour Beatty CLG, British company, manages the distribution of Irish gas, and effectively all the Irish Gas Board does is control the flow of gas internationally into the country. But on the ground, it's handled by Balfour Beatty. Balfour Beatty and Bord Gas and the energy regulator have dismantled the structures. There is no longer a training of apprenticeships in the gas industry, and most of the people working in it are sole traders and subservient to the whims of Balfour Beatty. The peat industry has been effectively destroyed as well, in that the production and processing of peat has been cancelled, and there's promises now that there will be some sort of environmental jobs created, but I'm very cynical about it. But the important thing is that a central board, the Commission for Energy Regulation, which in fact has even changed its name again, I just can't recall what it is, acting under the cover of Euro legislation, but with the complicity of the Irish government. And incidentally, on this one, it's a strange one, because the policies on energy in Ireland are cross-border. They cover the north of Ireland, which is a UK territory. And it's interesting in that the policies of close cut apply equally on both sides of the border. There's been attempts made, particularly under pressure of the Green Agenda and expressed through organisations such as the Green Party, to push for wind. But most of the wind, as I understand it, in terms of the generation, the building of the windmills, etc., has been done either by private money or by subsidies of state money. And again, state investment with no control over profit. So the whole energy industry in all sectors is one complete, total rip-off, destroying jobs, cutting wages. And
can you stop bringing it to a close? I just want to let Rob come back.
I just leave it at that.
Sorry, I don't like butting in, but
yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that it is a massive rip-off, and it's blatant. Yeah. But the tragedy of it is, it has no opposition politically from the left or from the trade unions, and that's where the real tragedy is.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. I mean, I think we need another meeting on this myself, and I'm sure everybody would think that was a good idea, because there's an awful lot to be said on this subject. And I can see there's a real enthusiasm for discussing it. So, with 5 minutes left, really, Rob, do you want to come back in for a last word?
Thanks, Pam. Just 2 points. Just want to qualify a statement about the middle class leadership of the climate movement. I'm talking mainly about Extinction Rebellion, which appear to be very influential. They have this idea of beyond politics, and the citizens' assemblies, which are talking shops composed of people taken, I think, randomly from across the population. But some of them are they are realizing that politics is important. And for instance, the previous leader of Extinction Rebellion, I think his name is Roger Hallam, has now started a new party called Burning Pink. I don't know if anyone's heard of Burning Pink. Anyway, you may never hear of them again, but that's a realization that politics is pretty central to the changes that have to be made. But I have no doubt that many, probably if not most of the people involved in the protests are working class, or if they middle class, they kind of solid people who would support a lot of the kind of necessary measures that we're talking about. There's, I think, a lot of understanding that we need a system change, but linking that with the ending of markets and a socialist society is a step that very few people have made, and I think that's what we need to be ready for. The other thing that I want the other point that I want to make is that most governments, most capitalist governments at this stage are still pretending that they can solve climate issues through the market system. For instance, promotion of electric vehicles, subsidies for green energy, etc. But I think the crucial touchstone or what will indicate a real seriousness is if the governments, and in particular the United States government, start tackling the big oil companies, the big oil and other big energy companies. And in the United States, it includes coal. And in India, which is the third largest emitter, Coal India, which is actually a state-owned entity, is, I think, a very dirty and an extremely large emitter of greenhouse gases. So until governments are prepared to take on the political fight of confronting these companies, we're not really going to see very much beyond nice words and wonderful promises, and only to find out 5 years later that not a heck of a lot has changed. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Rob. And again, thanks for bringing this subject in. As I say, we obviously need a fuller debate on it. There is so much else to say, but I think that's been a really good discussion. So that pretty much concludes WIN Conference for this week. We're back at the same time next Sunday, 4 o'clock, with two items to cover. One is the WIN Manifesto, and the other is to discuss setting up a political committee for WIN. So the two comrades are giving introductions to both those subjects next week. So unless anything needs to say anything on the last minute, I'd say that was the end of the conference. Nobody? Yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for your attendance, particularly people who've come from different time zones. It's quite difficult fitting yourself together when you're all around the world, but I think again it's been a great conference. So I thank everybody for their attendance, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
It's got to be the international Chinese.
Oh, right.
La raison donne dans son crâne, c'est l'éruption de la faim. Du passé fait son table rase, for l'esclave debout, debout. Le monde va changer de place, nous ne sommes rien, soyons doux. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous et demain l'internationale sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous et demain genre humain. Première main.起来，去喊叫破地努力，起来，全世界受苦的人。